So, I wanted to share with you, although Jacob's about to be 5 months, the birth story, which I never put on video. But I did write down, and I just wanted to get it captured on video so I can obviously finalize all of the progression update videos during my pregnancy that I had done and how it all turned out. So, pretty much, it all started after coming home from my Valentine's Day massage, as a matter of fact. And what ended up happening is I had a doctor's appointment that morning, and I pretty much felt nothing different. And it was the morning of my due date, which was February 14th. At the doctor, I did not get checked because I had gotten checked that Friday, and pretty much I was only effaced still, but only on, I think, on -1, and still no dilation on Friday. And although I did have a very heavy discharge that morning before my doctor's appointment because it wasn't bloody, pretty much my midwife told me that it was nothing. So I left the doctor's appointment without getting checked and just went on my merry way home, 40 weeks pregnant at that point. I then, like I said, proceeded at 5:30 to go to my 5:45 to my Valentine's massage, which I had decided to give to myself since Ray had the night before on Sunday driven back to Jacksonville because he had to work that Monday, which was Valentine's Day. And since there was no indication that anything was going to happen, he pretty much was just going to wait it out in Jacksonville. Even though he obviously was hoping that something would happen during the weekend when he was there, but it didn't. So come Monday after my massage at 7:30, when I got home, I was going to go have dinner, and I kind of felt a slow leak. And again, I thought it was just continuation of the morning's discharge that I was having, which was heavy and thick. Um, but this was a lot more watery, and it ended up drenching through my underwear. So I ended up putting just a paper towel and ate dinner. So after dinner, I still continued to feel this slow leak, and it finally filled up an entire pad that I had put on. And so I called my midwife. I basically told my mom, I don't know what's going on. I went downstairs to go get cheesecake, and I just kind of kept feeling this whoosh, and it kept filling up my pad. So I sat basically over the bidet and put in the cork on the bottom, just to see what was coming out of me and the color, because I was told that pretty much you should kind of be weary if it was your water breaking, the color and the consistency and all that good stuff, because you definitely don't want it to be tinged with meconium, because that would be a bad thing. So as I called her, she really didn't show any concern at that point, because she felt that if it was a slow trickle or a leak, um, that it pretty much could go on for a while that way, and it might just be leaking from the top of my, you know, placenta, my uterus, my bag, and would just refill itself. But as I'm talking to her, I'm letting her know that the bottom of the bowl is now at least with an inch completely filled with water. So I hung up and I called up my sister, and I told her, just to tell her what was going on and to get her opinion. But as I was calling her, um, I felt this huge gush. And at this point, the midwife had told me if I had like Depends or diapers to put those on, just so I wouldn't have to keep changing my pad, which I had. But luckily, I did do that because basically the gush filled up the entire Depends diaper. And at that point, it pretty much was no longer what if my water's breaking. It's pretty much a for sure thing. So she told me to hang up and call Ray, and so I did. Even though I had kind of given him the heads up a little bit earlier that something weird was happening and something was coming out of me, but I wasn't sure what it was. So at this point, when the gush came out, it was about 9:30 p.m. So I called back the midwife, and she basically let me know that from this point on, it would probably be about 5 hours before I would even have to really like go to the birth center, because things will at this point start progressing. But I mean, it would still take some time. So I let her know that I was going to tell my husband to head down and that I would just wait it out at home until he got there, which was going to be 5 hours later. And so in my mind, I just figured, well, at this point it's 9:30. Maybe we should rest or tell my parents to take a nap or something, because we will be, having a long night. And obviously my contractions were probably going to begin. So, which I also forgot to say that as I was hanging up with my sister, she was asking me if I had started to feel any sort of contractions. And I pretty much had only felt the Braxton Hicks up until this point, which was nothing. It was just, my stomach contracting. But as I was talking to her, I kind of stood up from where I was sitting and I felt this amazing, strong pressure down there, which kind of reminded me of when I was about to get my period, or when I got my period, sorry, and I had a really, really heavy flow coming on, which the pressure was just really heavy feeling. And so my sister pretty much said, well, that's because you have no water left. And that heavy feeling is his head pushing down on your cervix. And as soon as she described it that way, that's kind of exactly what I was feeling. I was pretty much feeling like a strong pressure on my cervix that felt very weighted. Um, so pretty much at that point, my contractions technically had begun. And and I think that they were maybe like 5 to 6 minutes apart at that point. Even when they began, they were already pretty much that close. But Ray had started to head down on his drive at approximately 10:30, because he started to get his stuff together. And pretty much when I hung up with him, I had kind of, just to, not have him go crazy, I told him, oh, we have plenty of time. The midwife said that we had 5 hours, to basically, before we even have to head down there. So take your time. Of course, I meant that for him to be safe and not drive at 100 miles an hour, but not to technically, take his time. But he did leave at 10:30, and at that point, I still thought that we had plenty of time. So pretty much, I quickly started realizing the difference, finally, between Braxton Hicks, the false labor pains, and the real ones. And water just kept gushing and gushing. And I really didn't know where all this water was coming from, because seriously, like, how big is your sack? So, but it just kept drenching and drenching and drenching. And I had gone downstairs to hang out with my parents and pretty much, pass the time and, in their company. And I had sat even on a towel that I had folded up, and that just was not working, because pretty much I just kept soaking through everything because I was still leaking. So I decided that maybe I should just go into the shower, which I instead, because I figured, how long is the hot water in the shower gonna last? Let me just instead fill the tub up, which was the best idea that I could have done, because that's where I was gonna stay for the next hour pretty much. So I decided to fill up the tub, and at that point it was maybe around 10:15 maybe when I got into the tub. And like I said, they were about 5 minutes apart. I decided, since I was pretty much gonna spend some time there, I decided to light up some candles that I had there, and I put on some Pandora on the New Age relaxing station, pretty much so I can have something to focus on, because the contractions, although 5 minutes apart, were real contractions at this point, and I really did need to start focusing on my breathing in order to just not tense up and not, start, you know, going over my pain threshold. So the hypnobirth breathing did help tremendously. But what also helped tremendously was the hot water. And that was definitely, you know, something that I don't regret, choosing, because for me, it definitely, helped with bringing down the pain like 50% and relaxing me. I always feel much more relaxed in the water, and I knew that that's, the way that my body was going to react. So at this point, every single time that a contraction would come, I'd have to really, really focus on not tensing up and do my breathing, which is basically inhaling in 10 counts and breathing out 10 counts and filling up my belly with air and letting it out. And when I did that, the contractions were much more tolerable, and they pretty much, would pass, after a minute. And then I'd have, about 5 minutes, to basically relax and get myself together and wait for the next one. But these 5 minutes decided to not last for 5 minutes too long, because by 10:45 I started realizing that they were now at 4 minutes apart. And my mom came upstairs, and I pretty much kind of informed her that these things were coming a little bit faster than I expected. And because all of a sudden, come 11 o'clock, they were at 3 minutes apart. And I figured at this point that 5 hours that I was told by the midwife just was not going to happen, because at 3 minutes apart, I should be at the birthing center. I mean, according to, all the things that I had read. So it became really apparent quickly that the baby wasn't on its way, which was a little bit, disheartening, because at this point I knew that Ray was like so far away that, there was a good possibility that he pretty much was going to miss, the birth of his son. And at this point, what was more important though was for me to stay sane and get my stuff together and basically make it safely to the birthing center in time. Um, so at that point, I decided to start getting my stuff together, and I did, of course, put on some makeup real quick because I knew that I was going to be photographed, and put my hair up, um, and we left to the birthing center. And that at that point, we left to the birthing center at 11:38, and arrived to the birthing center at 12 o'clock, which at that point, I had about 5 contractions in the car, which was horrible. Horrible, horrible. I mean, like, just knowing that I was pretty much going to have 5 contractions in the car was making me very, very, very tense, and with, absolute reason, because they were not good, especially, with my mother not knowing where she was going, and I had to kind of concentrate. And pretty much at this point, I couldn't even pick up the phone to even make a phone call, to even call anybody else to let them know that I was going to the birthing center. So I had to pretty much wait till I got there. So I got there and called my sister. Right after that, I was checked. And I was so effaced and so thinned out that the midwife pretty much said that she couldn't really tell how much I was dilated, because there was like nothing there. So she kind of estimated 7 centimeters, which kind of stuck in my head, because at 7 centimeters, I figured I still had some time. But I pretty much don't think I was even at 7 centimeters. I think I was way more than that, because I was definitely fully effaced. And at this point, the contractions were pretty much coming at like 2 minutes apart. And my sister decided, obviously at that point, to leave the house. Um, my midwife, of course, informed me at that point that my husband was not going to make it, and that I may not even make it into the tub, which was definitely not going to happen. So I made sure that they knew that I was getting into that tub, and they pretty much started bringing water from anywhere that they could find it, hot water from all the other bathrooms, and starting to fill up that tub. And I decided to change into my bikini top and get myself comfortable and pretty much sit on the edge of the bed, which is what, to me, I just felt comfortable, because I was able to sway back and forth, you know, on the edge of the bed. And every single time that contraction comes, yes, I was doing my breathing, but for whatever reason, and I knew that this would happen because I am very vocal whenever I feel some pain, I decided that moaning was pretty much going to help. So I pretty much moaned like this, which you can see in the entire birthing video, an example of what I did the entire time. But to me, it just felt, more, I don't know, pain. The pain just kind of helped me like lull myself into some sort of, relaxing kind of state. So I was very, 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 very anxious to get into the tub, and I kept seeing it. So I kept kind of pacing around and kind of swaying, and basically swaying from left to right until finally the tub was full enough and I jumped right in. And as I knew, immediately the relief was like instant, instant. So that was definitely you know, a good choice for me, because it definitely helped with the pain. Now, at this point, the midwives are pretty much looking at me like, oh my God, this kid is coming any second. Which, remember, I was just told that I was at 7 centimeters. So to me, I didn't think that any second was around the corner. I figured it was still going to be some time. Um, it wasn't that eminent. But I did, however, during my moans, have a feeling of pushing already. And this was like almost instant right after she had checked me. So as I would moan, I would find myself all of a sudden doing a push without her telling me, which then she asked me, you know, what was that? And I kind of thought I was doing something wrong. So I was like, I don't know. I think I was pushing. And she was like, well, were you, do you feel like pushing? And I'm like, I don't know. Should I? So at that point, I wasn't sure if I should push or not. So I kept trying to kind of restrain it until she finally yelled at me and said, just stop holding back and just push already. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm allowed to. Fine. I will, because pretty much just the feeling of pushing kind of felt like something was happening. And I really felt the progression. I felt him like almost moving towards the light kind of thing with every push. Um, and at that point, which is called the transition, which is pretty much the end, I couldn't believe that I was already there so quickly. I decided that or the contractions basically started to spread apart, which was interesting because although the contractions were pretty much bad when they were occurring, what I wanted to really emphasize, or what I emphasize to other women, is that yes, for 1 minute it sucks, but then for about 3 to 4 minutes there's nothing going on. Like, you can recuperate, like your body holds back and actually stops hurting. I was smiling, I was breathing, I was pretty much giving my mom directions for the video, having little chit chats, whatever, talking to the midwives. And I would wait, and then all of a sudden another one would come. And yes, that minute sucked. And at that point, I wasn't feeling any labor pains in my back, which is great because women do. I didn't. I didn't feel any pain in my back. I also kind of didn't really feel that ring of fire that, that supposedly is felt, because I think he just came out too fast for him to be like hanging out down there. Even though in the video you do see, his hair for some time. And it took probably 4 different contractions, 4 to 5. I keep forgetting to count them, in which, I actually pushed, because I would only push between 1 to 2 times, maybe even one good push during the contraction. So I'd push really strongly, and then, which I also had to kind of redirect my push because the midwife said I was pushing up here and not down there. So pretty much she kind of described it as, being constipated and to think of it that way and to push in my butt and not in my head. So as soon as she kind of said it like that, which I already knew, but I didn't realize I was doing it wrong as I was doing it. And then I finally kind of decided to, you know, concentrate on pushing correctly. So it probably wasn't until about like the second or third contraction until I was even pushing correctly. Um, so at that point, I finally gave a really, really good push, two good pushes at the end, in which he first really came through a lot. And you can actually see like the whole top of his head, which I did reach down and they told me, touch the top of his head. So I did. I didn't know what I was feeling exactly because it obviously, felt not like what I'm used to feeling. And and after that, he would kind of recede a little bit back, and then came one final push. And the final last push obviously was the one that did it, the last one. But he came through pretty much completely. Head came out one shot. And at that point, in order for me, I guess, not to tear too much, she told me to stop pushing and just breathe and just kind of blow out. So I did. Whatever. That's what they were telling me. So I stopped pushing and I just kind of breathed out. And at that point, Jacob came out completely. And I still was in shock because it had happened so fast, time wise, from the real water breaking to him being born at 1:15, which was amazing, to in under 4 hours, pretty much. And immediately, I was just relieved, obviously, but the pain was gone. Like, pretty much, that's it. Like, it was over and done with. And it was bad, but now he was here. And they immediately put him on my chest, and I was still like in awe that he was actually out. Like, and it was over. And that was it. And I did it. So everything that, had made me so anxious for so many months and the wondering why, which was obviously, what had me the most nervous, just basically not knowing how I was going to react, not knowing, how my body was going to react, not knowing how Jacob was going to react. Everything came out, the best that I could possibly come out. Obviously, completely bittersweet because Ray was not able to witness it, but luckily my mother did an amazing job at videotaping, even though I kept yelling at her because she kept videotaping my face and not down there where I wanted to make sure, she would capture. Since Ray wasn't going to be there to see it, I definitely wanted to have him see that moment in which Jacob came out into the world. And it was beautiful and wonderful, and I was just so happy, and he looked so great. And I mean, everyone basically said that he looked like a cesarean baby because he was completely intact. He wasn't swollen, he definitely was wide awake. He was screaming his head off, which is still typical 5 months later. When he's pissed off, he will cry and let you know. So obviously he was, pushed out of his little comfy home and into this world. So he wanted to let you know that he was here, and he was a little upset about it. So everything was wonderful. And the funny thing was that, of all people, my dad, which accompanied my mother and myself on this adventure, which he had never witnessed, not one birth, not even of his own children, not of my sister's kids. It just wasn't, something that you did back then. Now, at the age of 76, little did he know that not only was he going to witness, his youngest daughter's uh, son being born, But he also was going to have the opportunity to cut an umbilical cord, which he had never done. So granddad got to cut the cord, in lieu of his dad's, of Ray's absence, which was interesting because my dad had actually had a dream about that, a couple days before and was totally nervous about it and even wanted to like have me research about where to cut a cord. And because he had had this kind of dream slash nightmare that I was going to have the baby at home, which pretty much I almost did. So at that point, Ray was still 2 hours away, and we had to call him and let him know that his son was born. Happy and healthy, and his wife, me, was also healthy, and everything, had turned out wonderfully. But of course, it made me sad. And it definitely made him sad, that he had to miss it. But I think he's over it now. And there's always the next one. So Jake was born, and he finally was not born on Valentine's Day. He was born on February 15th, and he weighed 8 pounds, 1 ounce, and he was 21 inches long. And it was a wonderful, wonderful day. One of the happiest days of my life. And now he's 5 months old and thriving and doing wonderfully. And he brings us joy every single day. Some days are more challenging than others, but from the beginning, he's actually, been a great kid, and he's, moved along wonderfully in all of the phases and all of the stages. And now he's eating solids and sitting up and doing all the wonderful things that, 5 months old should be doing, and will continue to thrive. And so all I know that when I looked into his eyes, that that I knew that we had done an amazing job together, and he was awesome, and he did an amazing job, and it was wonderful. No drugs, no pain relieving, you know, no Pitocin, just an all natural, wonderful birth. And I can't wait for the next one.